Tonight's topic is looking at nutrition and lifestyle and whether that can help should you become infected with COVID-19. And it's also about a lot more than that as well. And so we'll begin by introducing ourselves. I know many of you already know us, but we know we've got a few names that we're not familiar with, so we shall begin. I'll begin with myself because Malcolm's going to do most of the talking. I'm a nutritionist and also a background as a librarian, and I work with Malcolm in running webinars, seminars and an immersion program, and we'll talk about those right at the end as well. Malcolm's going to do most of the talking tonight. I shall be monitoring the chat box, so if you have a question you want to ask, please type it into the chat box, and we'll see if we can get to that. If I know that there's something coming up a bit later that we're going to cover, well, I'll just pass by your question. We've also got a lot of questions that you submitted online, so thank you very much for that, and we hope we'll get time to answer them all for you. So, would you like to introduce yourself, Malcolm?
15-minute introduction?
No, the 1 minute introduction.
1 minute. Hello, I'm Malcolm Mackay. I'm a medical doctor. I'm a GP in practice here in Melbourne and via telehealth. And I still regard myself, although I'm promoting whole foods, plant-based nutrition and lifestyle, I still regard myself as a conventional doctor rather than an alternative doctor. And, you know, I give immunisations, I prescribe medications, probably far too many medications, but I also apply my knowledge in nutrition and lifestyle because for many of our chronic diseases and many other conditions, a whole foods plant-based diet is the safest and most effective treatment that we have available. So I use it, and I don't necessarily use it to the exclusion of medical treatments. You know, they're not mutually exclusive. My journey in plant-based nutrition goes back a long way, and this is a short introduction. Let's just say in medical school, I sort of caught on to this idea that most of our chronic diseases, many of our cancers were related to nutrition. I wanted to stay fit and healthy. I was into distance running. And after medical school, I actually studied nutrition. I did an 8-subject graduate diploma in human nutrition to sort of fill in the gaps, the absence of nutrition from the medical education. And I've done a few other courses over the years, including a board certification in lifestyle medicine. And since meeting Jenny some 12 years ago, Jenny and I have been working very much as Team Malcolm and Jenny. And Jenny said Jenny's very knowledgeable about nutritionists, but at heart she's still a librarian. So I often come up and write little medical things, and Jenny's always got all the references and that we need to try and get our facts right as much as we can, so that we're grounded on evidence as much as we can be grounded on evidence in a sort of science of uncertainty, nutrition, healthcare. So I think without much further ado, we'll start the presentation.
Did you change your glasses?
These glasses are fashionable. They're my less fashionable glasses.
Okay, over to you, Malcolm.
Okay, and I mentioned right at the beginning of my journey, I wanted to be healthy and have healthy blood vessels and be a better runner, and it seemed to work for me, and it still seems to be working for me. I managed to post the fastest half marathon time and 10K time in my age group, 60 to 64-year-olds, in the Gold Coast marathon events that closed on Sunday. So it still seems to be working for me, but I'm a lot slower than I was when I was 25. Okay, so some of you are here for a second listen. I gave this presentation back in May, and I guess there's some things that have changed since May. Well, something that's changed even in the last couple of months is after looking like it was almost under control in Australia, COVID-19's gone out of control in Melbourne, and we've been struggling to deal with a second wave with lots of community transmission. I think our understanding of how COVID-19 spreads has also changed. Early on, it was sort of thought, yeah, it's mostly from surfaces. You know, we touch the door handle, we touch the food packaging, we touch our mouth and nose. But it's now appreciated that it's largely spread through respiratory droplets. That, you know, when we, and that's why in all of Victoria now, it's now compulsory when we go out to wear a mask. And there have been people who've been calling for masks for a long time, but I think the evidence has reached a point now where we just recognise that this is something we blow out in our breath and breathe in from other people. But the surface spread is also, you know, not to be ignored. What else has changed? Well, we've had improved intensive care unit outcomes compared to how badly people were doing, the percentage of people that died, for example, you know, initially in the epidemic. Places like Melbourne and some of the US hospitals are now doing really well. We've got a better understanding of how to nurse people with severe COVID-19 and get a much better rate of survival and return to normal life. It used to be said that, oh, you couldn't get immunity. I never believed that because, I mean, how can you get rid of a virus without developing some immunity? It's now recognised that you do develop immunity to COVID-19. We don't know whether that'll last for years and years. It might not. Might only last for a year or two. And we've worked out that the antibody test to see whether you've got immunity is not all that useful, because after several months it can wear off so that it looks like you've got no antibodies, but you've actually got T cell memory in your body, so your body does have immunity. There was a whole debate early on about, you know, how do we manage this? Do we shut everything up? Do we all wear masks? Do we all hide away? Or do we let it run? I mean, you know, it's sort of like, and just let herd immunity develop, because if I think 60–70% of people had the infection, then there wouldn't be enough hosts for it to spread rapidly in the community, and it would sort of naturally come under control. However, there's been a worldwide consensus, you know, from most countries that they want to save lives at any cost to the present and future economy, and yeah, not to underestimate these costs. You know, if you look at costs in the cold reality of how much does it cost to save one disability adjusted life year, then probably the cost to a country like Australia is a very, very big number per disability adjusted life year saved. But it's not something that I have any control over, or any of us do. You know, our nations have decided to take this approach. We've decided that we're going to spend a very high price for now and the future to minimise the loss of life. And this is all sort of assuming, if we're not going to do herd immunity, that we're going to get a vaccine and at least vaccinate our most at risk people who might die, and not even necessarily stop people from having it. As Peter Doherty said the other day, we only need to have a treatment or vaccine that stops people dying. It doesn't necessarily have to completely stop it. But that's a long way off, and you know, the very earliest we'll have a vaccine by late next year. So we better bunker down and consider that we're in this for a long time. So COVID-19's not just the flu. No, actually with the flu, the people who are most vulnerable, like when swine flu came to the world from the North American pig industry, actually, when swine flu came into the world, all of the people who were around in the 50s had some immunity from exposure to similar previous flu viruses, had some partial immunity. But this virus is sort of completely new, and there'd be only a few people among us who, you know, happen to have immunity by chance or because of immunity to to a corona cold virus. The other feature about the COVID-19, among its box of nasty tricks, is that it can be very infectious before your symptoms even begin, which is really tricky. You know, you can screen people for temperature, but they might be spreading it before they even have a fever. it's sort of like it gets into your body and sort of, if you like, turns off the burglar alarm, so your immune system doesn't even know what's happening to start with. And then once it gets into the body, it actually spreads. It spreads down into the lungs, but then it can spread beyond the lungs. You know, it can go and multiply in other tissues and damage other tissues in the body, cause fairly widespread damage. And there are some unknown factors that may make some apparently healthy people vulnerable, like after a US hospital had a couple of sets of apparently healthy young male twins, both got very sick and one died, they looked into this and found that these two sets, these men had a mutation in the toll-like receptor 7 gene, and that hadn't been apparent in any other, you know, in their life as, you know, vulnerability to infection, but it was for COVID. So no one can really be, you know, guaranteed of a mild illness with COVID-19. Obviously, prevention's the best cure. You know, a small country like New Zealand sort of pretty much eradicated it, but hey, they have to stay locked up for a long time. And in Australia and many other countries, you know, we're doing social distancing, wearing masks, taking all these other strategies to try and avoid infection. So the whole focus of the talk today is not about whether we should be, you know, having a vaccine, not about whether we should be going for herd immunity or all isolating. The whole focus of today is what we can do, each of us, so that if we do get COVID-19, we improve our chance of having a mild illness and not a severe illness. And I think this is the role of nutrition and lifestyle in how sick someone's likely to get with COVID-19 is something that's totally missing from the public discourse. There's just no discussion of it at all. It's like researchers looking at everything that might possibly have an effect on how severe the infection gets, except for nutrition. But we think that it does have a big effect, and we'll be talking about this. But there's never been a better time to promote healthy eating. You know, you've got a public that are scared of getting really sick in many parts in Australia, particularly in Melbourne. You know, we're all bunkered down in our houses, and really would be a community that would be quite open to a public health campaign. Unfortunately, in Australia, you know, we wouldn't be able to have a campaign that said eat less meat, or you'd even be hard put having one to say eat less processed food. But you could have a public health campaign that even just encouraged people to eat more fruit and vegetables, even up to the recommended intake that hardly any Australians reach. And what would be the side effects of this? Well, you suddenly find the community would be less prone to cancer, they have less heart disease, etc., etc. So the other health side effects of this sort of public health campaign would only be better health in general. So the lack of nutrition in the debate is a missed public health opportunity at a teachable moment. COVID-19 is not random about who gets very sick. It's a kind virus in one respect, in that infants and children rarely become severely ill. And notice I'm not giving any absolutes here. Healthy young adults mostly do well, even with asthma, and that had me a little bit rattled. At first I thought, oh yeah, I should be all right, and then I thought, hang on, I get asthma. By the second week of COVID, I could really, you know, give me asthma. The research is suggesting that that people with asthma actually do fairly well, that it doesn't seem to be a major risk factor in how sick people get if they have COVID. So that's good news for someone who asked that question about asthma. The elderly, the elderly generally do very badly. But, you know, if you ever hear like 15% death rate in, you know, the over 80s or over 85s or something, that's an 85% survival rate. And the question about the elderly is, you know, no denying that things like your immune system, you know, sort of runs down with age. But is the high COVID risk, you know, age per se, or is it because of the next category we talk about, that the most vulnerable people are people with chronic disease, and that's most older adults in a developed country like Australia, and increasingly in some of the developing countries as well. And the chronic diseases we're talking about are things like high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease. interesting. These are sort of all sort of things that impact heart and blood vessels and things more than lungs, for example. Although I believe that having severe chronic pulmonary disease, emphysema, chronic bronchitis from many years of smoking or other causes of lung damage does put you at increased risk, obviously. The at-risk vulnerable groups, there are some common mechanisms behind some of those conditions, mechanisms of disease, the physiological processes in the body that are not functioning normally. And that's the impaired artery function, the increased inflammation, and insulin resistance. However, all of these risk factors are dynamic and respond to nutrition, which we'll come back to. So how does COVID-19 cause people to become critically ill? And this is relevant to how we think about the nutrition. If you're a person vulnerable to COVID-19, it may initially meet little resistance when it gets into your respiratory system, when it gets into your lungs. As an aside here too, the dose makes a difference too. If you inhale if you inhale only a small dose, then you're likely to get less sick. Whereas if you're someone who's been heavily exposed, and like your partner's been coughing COVID all over you, then the bigger dose means you're more likely to get very sick. So anyway, you're a vulnerable host. It doesn't meet much resistance in the lungs. It has this trick of sort of turning off the cell's burglar alarm response, if you like, so it gets to multiply, get away before the immune system even starts doing anything. But then it can spread. It can spread to fatty tissue. Apparently, it likes to grow in body fat tissue, which sort of explains one of the risk groups, and other tissues in the body, like the gut, for example. And it can infect a compromised endothelium, the lining of the arteries all over the body. They actually, because this virus, all those little red spikes on that model they've got there, attached to the ACE2 receptor, and that's in many, many tissues in the body, but particularly blood vessels. And then the person might seem to be doing all right. They might go through the first week and the doctors and everyone might be going, well, I think they're doing all right. And then the immune system really gets active, but it gets overactive. And then they've got this huge inflammatory response. And the lungs virtually can fill up with fluid and you can't breathe anymore. It can also damage heart and blood vessels. And you can imagine an inflammatory, if you've ever seen documentaries and those beautiful infographics of the inside of arteries, you can imagine all the cells lining the arteries all sort of getting inflamed and starting to peel off, and bits of blood sticking to it and little clots forming all over the body. And of course that can lead to damage all over the body and damage to the brain, damage to other organs. However, nutrition regulates the immune response and inflammation and endothelial health, the health of our blood vessels. Oh, and I should add that, if you've got some severe illness, whether it's COVID-19 or blood infection or other pneumonia, if you've got aging, again, can't totally escape the aging, and chronic disease, then your body's got less reserve to sort of maintain all the life systems in balance when it's severely stressed. Like, for example, one of my relatives had a pneumonia earlier this year, and as part of it had a heart attack because the infection just pushed his not particularly healthy heart to the point where the heart attack happened. If someone's got diabetes or even pre-diabetes, blood sugar can spiral out of control. If someone's got impaired kidneys and suddenly, the body's in a bit of shock and the blood pressure drops down, it can sort of tip over into kidney failure. But I think at any age we can at least build up the resilience of the resistance of our body to physical stress and sort of give it more with nutrition and lifestyle, and give it more capacity to maintain balance. So chronic disease is a modifiable risk factor. I keep reading about, these risk factors. I have to stop adjusting myself on this seat liner. And, you know, and our health experts, doctors, epidemiologists, talk about these risk factors as if they're just there. You know, he's got hypertension, he's got hypertension. The person has this, they've got this. There are some risk factors that don't change. You know, if you're 87 years old, you're 87 years old. If you're male and only have one gene for the TLR7 gene, you can't change that. I mean, you can change your gender, but not your sex chromosomes. And then there's immunogenetics. You know, we sort of inherit sort of different qualities in our immune system that, you know, might make us better. In fact, they've even found a new one. It looks like blood group can make a difference. It looks like blood group O people have slightly less chance of coming down with COVID, and blood group A, slightly more chance. No blood group diets though, please. The risk factors you can change, the ones that some people consider fixed, like high blood pressure, diabetes, artery disease, obesity. There's evidence for partial or even complete reversal of these risk diseases. You know, high blood pressure, in programs, you know, whether it's Britican, McDougall, you know, disease reversal programs. If many of us doctors who have been practicing plant-based nutrition and lifestyle medicine for some time have all seen many people who've started off with high blood pressure, even on several medications, and ended up either, you know, on a greatly reduced regime of medicines or on no medicine at all. You know, like, okay, well, that risk factor's gone, hasn't it? You're on no medicines and it's normal. Same with diabetes. You know, it used to not really be well accepted that, and this is type 2 diabetes. You know, like if you've destroyed your pancreas with autoimmune disease and you've got type 1, you've got type 1. But with type 2 diabetes, I guess the advent of bariatric surgery, where people suddenly lost massive amounts of weight, so like, oh, diabetes gone. But this has also been seen again in the sort of you know, retreats, plant-based nutrition, lifestyle medicine arena, that some people have measurements that show that they no longer have their type 2 diabetes. That risk factor is gone. And then, of course, there's the work with heart disease. Many of you will have heard of, you know, Dean Ornish proving that artery disease could be reversed with lifestyle alone. The Esselstyn program. So I guess the message that comes out of this is that these risk factor chronic diseases are not immutable risk factors, and that it's never too late to wind back the timeline of chronic disease and reduce the impact of potential COVID infection, even in the midst of a pandemic. Although chronic diseases take many years to develop, some of the underlying mechanisms, you know, the underlying sort of physiology, chemistry underlying underneath them, is actually quite dynamic, quite changeable over all different timescales, even a period of as short as hours, possibly even minutes. Like a single meal can either increase or decrease things like inflammation, oxidative stress. We can measure that. We can, or endothelial function. You know, we can get people to eat a sausage and egg McMuffin and watch their blood go sludgy and their arteries unable to open up and function properly for hours afterwards. Insulin resistance. You know, you can give people a piece of steak or add tuna to their rice and watch their response to insulin dive right down. After several weeks, you can get even more powerful effects, like in Ornish's research. Even before there was time to, you know, see arteries unblocking on angiograms, the blood flow measurements to damaged parts of the heart would improve. Over a period of weeks, insulin resistance. It's taking off my Apple Watch. It's after all, it's a mischief. Over a period of several weeks, you know, insulin resistance can be reversed, and we've sort of seen this evidence of this in our live-in immersion events, where someone will come in, you know, with type 2 diabetes on insulin, and by about day 2 or 3, we're rapidly reducing their insulin, because even though they're eating lots of carbohydrates, their body's so much more sensitive to it. And of course, the gut microbiome. Someone did ask about keto and the gut microbiome versus vegan. Landmark study 2014. comparing eating a high fibre, low fat, plant-based diet, pretty much what we'd call whole foods plant-based, with a diet that was based on eggs and cheese and meat. They wanted to test the two absolutes there, which we'd now call a keto diet. So it was before keto term was even invented. And they looked at the microbiome, and all the subjects, when they went on the, let's say, WFPB diet, developed the sort of gut microbes that are associated with good health. All of the subjects, when they're on the keto diet, had gut microbes that are associated with diseases of the bowel disease and cancer and generally inflammation. And they found that within about 3 days. So, you know, after a few weeks, you even after 1 week, you radically transform your gut microbiome, and that does affect the rest of your body. And as we see at our live-in immersion event, well, actually, we see within 6 days, but fairly quickly you see a reduction in joint pains and you know, as the inflammation in the body settles. So, because the disease mechanisms are so dynamic, every meal can be something that can either shift you towards or away from chronic disease. A healthy body, a healthy immune system can only live in a healthy body. When you think of it, the immune system is not sort of like a packaged, compartmentalized organ. It's sort of diffusely all over the body, isn't it? And just about every body system, including mental health, influences immune function. Immune function is suppressed by, you know, having fatty blood, high blood sugar, oxidative stress, inflammation, stress hormones. So I guess COVID-19's reminded us that unhealthy bodies are less able to cope with infection because unhealthy bodies don't have healthy immune systems. Why does the can nutrition help reduce this immune reaction? Yes, and we'll come to that. So you've often heard people say, this will strengthen your immune system. You want to have it make your immune system stronger. Actually, the immune system is tightly regulated. A hyperactive immune system can cause many problems, like autoimmune disease, where it gets so hyperactive it attacks parts of you. Allergies, it wildly attacks anything, including that peanut protein. And then a hyperactive immune system can also lead to sort of a runaway inflammation. You know, the body reacts so wildly that that it actually damages and destroys your own tissues. So let's replace this concept of a strong immune system with a well-regulated and well-supported by a healthy body immune system. And the support from a healthy body comes from healthy arteries, healthy organs, healthy total body. So it's not boost your immune system, it's supporting your immune system so that it can do its job. People have asked about nutrient deficiency, and certainly nutrient deficiencies are known to impair immunity, like zinc deficiency, for example. But there's been quite a lot of research that suggests that unless you're frankly deficient in something, that supplementing nutrients beyond our needs does not boost the immune system or does not better regulate the immune system. The evidence is equivocal, even for the most, you know, widely promoted and accepted immune boosting nutrients, you know, vitamin C and zinc, for example. And I might add, often of little relevance to those of us eating a whole foods plant-based diet. I mean, you know, our food's got so much vitamin C in it, our bodies are saturated with vitamin C. Don't expect you can't really saturate your body any more than have it saturated. There are exceptions to this, you know, in our modern living, because of because we don't live in nature, we're not exposed to bacteria that make vitamin B12 and to soil, and so it's recommended that everyone who eats a completely plant-based diet takes a vitamin B12 supplement in a small amount. And vitamin D, at the moment in Melbourne, it's freezing cold and cloudy, and our ski resort's closed, and we're all locked down anyway. Where did I distracted myself there? But it's not very sunny, and we're not inclined to take our shirts off outside, and so we could be getting low in vitamin D. So yeah, in some circumstances, it may be you may need to take vitamin D as well, because we're meant to live outside and get sunshine.
So Kath's just asked the question about an immune system that's too strong and therefore can be too healthy as a disadvantage, which is misleading. Yeah.
Yeah. The question about the immune system, for example, scientists have been sort of puzzling over, like, well, why do children seem to do so well with this? It's sort of like some other things they don't do very well with, like they don't do all that well with influenza. And it's sort of one of the thoughts. I mean, they might have less ACE2 receptors on their cells, but one of the other thoughts is that they have a weaker inflammatory response to infection, and that could be a disadvantage with some diseases. But with one that harms people through out of control inflammation, that might actually be a saving grace for them, that the virus multiplies a bit in their body, the immune system sort of slowly gets onto it, but doesn't overreact. Whole plant foods provide a symphony of nutrients, a symphony of phytonutrients. The phytonutrients or phytochemicals are the thousands, perhaps 100,000 other substances in food that work together to enhance, to regulate our body chemistry. The phytonutrients are maybe not like essential vitamins that are essential to have life, but they're essential for good health, and they do have roles in enhancing the immune response and in regulating inflammation. And supplements just cannot simulate this complex symphony and may actually unbalance it and make it worse. Like, you take a whole lot of beta carotene and you find it competes against the other carotenoids that might be more important. So you have to be careful when you're taking isolated concentrated nutrients, because the effect might actually be negative. There's a lot of reductionist research out there about particular nutrients, about particular foods and immune function. And you could go to Michael Greger's nutritionfacts.org. There's some interesting ones there, like, the beta-glucan in yeast may have some effects on the immune system. And there are many, many other foods and food ingredients that have been studied. And I think sometimes it's just, why that particular food? Well, maybe that particular food was just one that was studied, or maybe the industry put up the money for the research. I think where I come back to here, and not to deny that there probably are individual foods that sort of have specific immune regulating effects. For every one of those, there's probably another 100 that also have a similar or different effect that we just don't know about. And my message here would be to come back to that the nutrition whole is more important than the sum of the parts. The whole foods plant-based diet is more important than the beta-glucan. A whole foods plant-based diet has a very wide breadth of effect, like one dietary pattern to rule them all. One dietary pattern for that does gut health, artery health, metabolic health, weight management, low cancer risk, immune health. It sounds like too much, actually, but the way I look at this is it's not all that surprising that the same diet that helps the arteries, helps the immune system, etc. It's just the stuff that's sort of most suited to the human anatomy and physiology. On the breadth of effect, I think some of this was shown by some research that T. Colin Campbell was involved in, looking at the risk of cancer in people with chronic hepatitis B, people who get hepatitis B very early in life and have an infection that they carry with them lifelong. The body can never completely eradicate it. And he found that some of the same factors that sort of are associated with more cancer in the people with hepatitis B, and that's animal protein, are also associated with evidence for better immune response. And the immune response was measured by an increased number of antibodies against hepatitis B and a reduced number of virus particles in the liver cells or the blood. Yeah, and so basically this research showed that animal protein seemed to be bad for cancer and immune response to Hep B. And plant foods and antioxidants from plants seem to be associated with both a lower risk of cancer and a lower, better immune response to the virus, a breadth of effect. The elderly don't need to eat more protein as is being promoted. The elderly need to eat more fruit and vegetables because adequate fruit and vegetable intake seems to boost antibody response. In this one study, they took healthy, and remember that word, 65 to 85-year-old volunteers with a low fruit and veg intake. That is an average of 1.4 serves a day. Yeah, believe it or not, it wasn't hard to find those people. And then they got them to, they got one half of them to try and eat 5 serves per day for a few months. And then look what happened when they gave them a pneumonia vaccine. And we'll take that as a surrogate of an infection. And in the group that had the increased fruit and vegetable intake, they saw a greatly increased antibody response to the vaccine. And this is a problem in the elderly people. Like, for example, we have a special extra strong flu vaccine that we give to the elderly people. Maybe we should just give the normal one and give them some fruit and vegetables. In case you think that these people are unusual, 95% of Australians fail to even consume 2 fruits plus 5 vegetables per day. And when you hear in the media and you hear about, you know, healthy people and or you hear some bad health thing happened, had a heart attack or had got severe COVID, and this was an otherwise perfectly healthy person, I think looking at those healthy people that were eating almost no fruit and vegetables sort of makes you sort of rethink about what we really think when we say healthy. I've certainly seen this over the years with, you know, heart risk. Like, he had a perfectly healthy cholesterol, one that I'd say was, you know, twice as high as it should be. Anyway, moving on from that. The health of the immune system begins in the gut. Actually, 70% of our white blood cells actually reside down in the gut. Just inside that little fine thin membrane that separates the outside world, that's inside the gut tube essentially, from the inside of the body where our blood and flesh is. And these immune cells are sort of all on guard along what we call the gut barrier, the sort of single cell layer of gut lining cells that are sort of held together by little spot whorls. And these immune cells are listening. They're listening out for anything that might be going bad. And if they get lots of signals from the microbes nicely fermenting away at fiber and starch, that actually sends a signal to a receptor on the immune cells. Those short chain fatty acids that good microbes make from fiber and starch tell the immune system, look, everything's all right, calm down, stay ready for duty, but don't go overactive, don't sort of go on the rampage, don't attack a peanut protein, don't start attacking yourself. Whereas if you put animal products and oils and processed food down inside that gut, then you get a growth of the wrong kind. You don't get as many of those good microbes, and you get a growth of other microbes that produce quite inflammatory things. And you get these polysaccharides that cross over that cell barrier and signal the immune cells and actually latch onto receptors that sort of warn them there must be a bacterial invasion and leading them to become dysregulated. We mentioned before the gut microbiome can flip within days. Part of the practical message in this is stay away from low carb diets. It's the worst thing you can do for your gut microbiome. And the gut microbiome, you're only beginning to understand all its effects on the body, but it regulates processes throughout the body. Like even the blood-brain barrier is sort of enhanced by short-chain fatty acids made by good microbes. There's even some antioxidants the microbes make that are sort of protective of the brain. It's almost like they want to protect their host, which sort of makes sense. And those short-chain fatty acids that all the microbes are making from the good food, not only do they work on the immune cells in the gut, but they also go through the blood and influence immune cells like in the lungs to make them to more ramp up the ones that are going to attack viruses and sort of calm them down away from the high levels of inflammation. I guess on the subject of, and the gut microbiome will, when you look at all those other risk factors, the gut microbiome, the short chain fatty acids, for example, will help protect artery cells, will help protect kidneys, will help regulate blood sugar control and improve our blood sugar control. And then there's the whole subject of inflammation. And if you have the bad gut microbes from the keto diet and the oils, then they're going to be making things, there's going to be things like endotoxins, which cause inflammation throughout the body. You don't want to start off a disease, start off with a level of inflammation in the body when you got a disease that's going to make you sick through inflammation. TMAO is a substance that microbes make when they eat meat and eggs, and it damages arteries and kidneys. Versus, all those good things, those anti-inflammatory short-chain fatty acids you get from plants, and of course the antioxidants that are in plants. So I think for the gut microbiome and its benefit to the immune system and the chronic disease, the fibre and resistant starch are really the key nutrients for gut health. Yeah, inflammation, and someone mentioned asthma in our questions, and like, does a whole foods plant-based diet influence asthma? And yes, there's actually been some research in Australia looking at what happens when you give people more inflammatory diet, that's more saturated fats like meat and dairy and processed foods, versus more protective plant foods like fruits and vegetables. And you can actually show that level of inflammation in the lungs can be increased or decreased. In fact, I think they've even done some research showing that a single meal can increase inflammation in the lungs. And we do hear many testimonials of people who have had a lot of problems with asthma, whose asthma sort of settles down or greatly improves when they go whole food plant-based. Where was I? So COVID can rumble along for 1 week and things don't seem too bad. And then the immune response gets going and the dysregulated inflammation. And cytokines are a kind of inflammatory hormone mediator, and people get what they call a cytokine storm, where the immune cells just release a ridiculous amount of these inflammatory mediators. And the risk factors for severe COVID generally, it certainly includes states of chronic inflammation. Obesity itself is a state of inflammation. I don't know why nature designed us like this, but if our fat stores in our body get too filled up, if our fat cells get overfull, then for some reason they actually release inflammatory mediators. But the good news is that obviously you're not going to be able to lose, 30 kilograms, in a month or anything like that. But the good news is that even reducing your body weight by 5 or 10%, improves your metabolic health, and that should translate to less risk of severe COVID. I
was just going to interrupt this because there was a question about whether you would see improvement over a 5-month period of eating a 90% WFPB diet. So I think the answer to that is definitely. Well, someone who's been doing this for 5 months, in terms of have they reduced their risk? Yeah, how much improvement?
Yeah, I'd expect to see a lot of improvement. Often improvement can happen very quickly, and 100% is going to get better improvement. But studies like the Adventist 2 Health study, the Seventh-day Adventists in California, show a sort of stepwise sort of gradient. Like, for example, looking at their diabetics, like the ones that ate a small amount of meat get more diabetes than the vegetarians, who get more than the vegans. So it's sort of a scale. Every step you take along the spectrum from a standard diet, Australian diet, to a whole foods plant-based diet will give you improvements along the health spectrum, and many of those things happening quite quickly. So COVID can give you the real killer can be the cytokine storm, the sort of runaway inflammation. And we can reduce inflammation with nutrition. Like we can eat resistance. We can eat beans and whole grains and foods that provide fiber and resistant starch for our microbiome. We can avoid eating like inflammatory fried foods, meats, high saturated fat foods, for example, which promote inflammation. And we can eat whole plant foods that provide many antioxidants and anti-inflammatory phytonutrients. You only find those in plants. You don't find phytonutrients in animal products. Oh, maybe someone might say, look, we've got an egg that has this antioxidant in it. You'd have to eat, 9 eggs, and it'd be equivalent to 1 spoonful of spinach, but it has got a trace because we fed the chickens more of this food. But generally, it's only the plant foods and not the processed ones, only the whole plant foods that are really high in these protective phytonutrients. And if there was any anti-inflammatory superfood, it would be leafy green vegetables. But who's competing? I mean, the berries can sort of make they claim, and there's other plants. Even whole grains have antioxidant polyphenols in them.
There's been a question on that. Is there a difference in anti-inflammatory response between raw or cooked green leafy veg?
That's a good question. A difference between the inflammatory response of cooked and raw. Sometimes cooking makes the phytonutrients easier for the body to assimilate and absorb. But then occasionally there are examples of things that might be damaged by cooking, like the sulforaphanes in cruciferous vegetables. You'll get a bigger dose of those if you're chewing up more cruciferous vegetables than cooked. Generally, I'd sort of be encouraging. I'd be thinking, number one, the most important thing is to eat the whole plant foods, and then I don't think we have any. Most of the disease reversal studies have actually used a lot of cooked foods. Perhaps an ideal diet might be a mixture of raw and cooked, and would obviously include cooked starchy foods like the starchy vegetables and the legumes and the whole grains, because they're sort of things that we don't assimilate well if they're raw.
One more question before we leave this slide. The recent argument that plants have a chemical arsenal such as oxalates, lectins and phytates, anti-nutrients that manifest in inflammation.
Those plants don't want to be eaten, do they? The only problem with that is, like even looking at, you've heard that story, like grains cause inflammation or have anti-nutrients. Some of those anti-nutrients, like phytates in whole grains, actually, protect against cancer and improve bone health. And I think our bodies, we've evolved eating plants. I mean, I'm not just talking about the last, 100,000 years, last 500,000 years. We actually evolved from, a group of animals that until relatively recently, our whole metabolism has been designed about, eating plants. Starting off in the ape-like creatures in the rainforest. So these substances are not new to us. The plant paradox falls down if you start to look at the first reference or two and how they try and support their argument. If you eat raw red kidney beans, then the lectins will actually make you sick. If you cook them, you'll destroy the lectins and you'll be just fine. So many of the things that plants make to protect themselves actually also help protect us. Like they have antioxidants to protect them from, the sun and the environment. They have some salicylates to help protect them against pests, and they actually help to make our bloods less clotty. You might go, but soy has things that sort of get in the way of our estrogen receptors, and that's sort of good. That sort of down regulates the receptors a bit. And our whole bodies have evolved sort of designed to sort of have the metabolism tweaked by eating a diet that's quite high in plants. I'm getting bogged down on the question. I think I'll move on from that one. Endothelial cells, they're the key to the health of our arteries. And you'll notice this illustration. My daughter's a graphic designer. I'm not. And those green cells lining the arteries are the endothelial cells, and there you can see them busy making NO, nitric oxide. And the nitric oxide supports artery health, stops the arteries getting thickened, makes the things in the blood less sticky, even sort of attacks that plaque over on the left and sort of makes it less prolific. Oh, and of course, the big role of nitric oxide is when the body makes, when the cells make nitric oxide, the artery wall relaxes and the artery opens up a little bit and the blood flow increases a lot. So the ability of these endothelial cells to make nitric oxide is sort of critical for artery health. And having poor endothelial health, you know, whether it's high blood pressure, diabetes, or heart disease, it seems to be a common risk factor for COVID. And COVID infection can get into that lining of the arteries and you know, cause lack of blood supply to tissues, even do weird things like cause more flow to go to parts of the lungs that are less aerated and less flow to parts that get more aerated.
Just before you leave this slide, there's been a comment. Another graduate from the Doug Lisle School of Art.
Yeah, no, I think Doug Lisle's a step ahead of me in his art. And of course, if you infect those endothelial cells and they go all thick and they're not making all the nitric oxide, then the blood components get sticky, the wall of the artery loses its Teflon qualities, and then you can start to get thrombosis, little blood clots all over the body, which it can be part of severe COVID. But we can support our endothelial health. We can stop eating things that damage it, like inflammatory meat and fried food and food that lacks any phytonutrients, like, you know, that demon sugar that's always blamed. Quit smoking in brackets. So I sort of left that there because it is pretty obvious. So we can protect those endothelial cells against inflammation and oxidative stress. And we can eat nitrate-rich green leafy vegetables. Oh, the beetroot juice was in there because it was used in research. We'd prefer to see you eat the leafy green vegetables. If you eat this every day or even several times a day, you'll enhance the ability of the endothelial cells to make nitric oxide. And you might think, well, why would I do that? It's because you're not a 20-year-old Okinawan woman. Like most of us, particularly older adults in the Western world, have trashed our endothelium over the years. And rather than looking like a beautifully, you know, tiled surface of perfection, it looks more like a bathroom wall that a drunken tiler tiled out of a collection of old tiles. And so in that state, you know, we really need to do everything we can to enhance the health of our already damaged endothelium. Oh, there was some very interesting research done because we were sort of looking, what research is done in COVID? Has anyone done this and has anyone done that? You know, like, and of course, it's too early to get much direct research that's been done. But COVID-19's predecessor, the you know, the SARS outbreak of 2004, I think it was it? 2003. Some research was done on that, and they found that if you gave they looked at some lung cells, and they also make nitric oxide. And they found that if you gave those cells some extra sort of juice to make more nitric oxide out of the same enzyme that's used in artery cells, then the production of more nitric oxide by those cells inhibited the replication of the SARS type coronavirus. So we could sort of assume that this might also happen with the new coronavirus, that if we can stimulate nitric oxide production by keeping up those nitrate-rich fruit and vegetables and stopping trashing our cells, then they're going to actually have some protection against COVID-19. And while on this topic, well, obviously out of this comes that idea that, you know, what's good for the arteries is also good for the lungs. Someone, I think we had a question about the hydroxychloroquine, a Trump favourite, and mind you, you know, it's used for rheumatoid arthritis, but you have to be careful because, you know, you have to monitor the eyes with it because it can start to cause irreversible eye damage. And you sort of want to catch that before it gets too bad. It's irreversible. And it can cause other nasty side effects. And certainly when you're looking at the kidney cells of African green monkeys, it seems to inhibit the infection and proliferation of COVID-19. But this doesn't happen in other cells that were studied at, like human respiratory cells. So put these all together and have a look at some of the small trials that were done with hydroxychloroquine. And the consensus generally among scientists is hydroxychloroquine looks like a bit of a dud as a treatment for COVID-19. Back to what doesn't get the research, and that is using plant-based nutrition to even treat COVID-19. Like, well, what are you going to eat? Like, you've got COVID-19, you've been really good in isolating at home because we don't want you COVID-19, and you're feeling pretty unwell. So what should you do nutrition-wise? Well, you should keep well hydrated. I think that applies to any sort of viral illness. I would be recommending plenty of green leafy vegetables for your to enhance the health of your endothelium, to dampen down the inflammation. You might not feel very well, so maybe this would be one situation where a smoothie might be a good idea. I'd also be thinking of the gut microbiome, and rather than fasting, I'd be sort of thinking I better, even if I'm not very hungry, sort of maintain a little bit of an intake of whole grains, legumes, a diversity of plants actually, to maintain the health and keep feeding my microbiome, to keep it pumping out those short chain fatty acids. There was one of the US cardiologists, Baxter Montgomery, I think early on in the pandemic, was doing a little bit of work where he tried giving a few people in hospital green smoothies, and the preliminary results were looking good. I wish someone would do some big studies like that. I mean, why not? What are the side effects going to do? Surely you could get ethics approval for a green smoothie. It won't make you go blind like hydroxychloroquine. Exercise enhances immunity. Physical exercise activity has been found to be beneficial to nearly every aspect of our health and resilience. And we're still allowed to go out for up to 1 hour a day in Melbourne and exercise. There was a 2011 study that found that a single bout of moderate exercise enhanced circulating immune cells and antibodies. And a 12 or 15-week program, when they looked at subjects for that length of time, they recorded a lower rate of colds in those subjects, which was interesting. And the benefits of exercise on immunity are sort of, in addition to those of exercise overall, on a regular basis, reducing inflammation and working to reduce many of the sort of underlying mechanisms of chronic disease. And if you're worried about exercise impairing your immunity, skip the daily marathon. But hey, look, I think almost none of us are going to be inclined to actually do enough fitness overtraining to actually suppress our immune system. Sleeping well is important for immune health. The modern world is chronically sleep deprived. Here we are looking at this bright screen and wide awake on a cold night. Inadequate quality sleep adversely affects many of aspects of our health, like it gives you high blood pressure, poor blood sugar control, leads to weight gain, quite apart from the effects on the brain, both dementia risk and day-to-day mood and memory. There was one study that did look at immunity, or one of the studies we found, more than one, and that found that if you restricted sleep to only 4 hours a night for a few days before an influenza vaccine, that and this was an apparently healthy young man, that the antibody response to the vaccine was half at the 10-day mark. And that early response could be a critical period if you have a real viral infection. So sleep is important. Some sleep tips, yeah. And this is particularly relevant when so many of us are sort of in a sort of lockdown state, or in Melbourne, a super lockdown state. you want to maintain a regular sort of going to bed and waking up time. Yeah, even 1 or 2 weekend late nights and sleep-ins effectively gives the body jet lag. And for quality sleep, not just sleep, quality sleep, you want to avoid too much caffeine, even earlier in the day. Salt and MSG often give people problems with their sleep. You want to have a fasting period, for a couple of hours before you go to bed. Again, adequate fluid intake seems to be important. And a little wind down before you go to bed. Like, you don't want to be doing something exciting on the screen, like doing a webinar before you go to bed. It's going to be a bit of a late night, isn't it? And we actually evolved outside and exposed to light, and so did our ancestors. And the light is very important for our body to sort of sync our body clocks with the 24-hour cycle, and that's really important, as anyone who's listened to Michael Greger podcast will have heard in the last couple of weeks. And so, you will help your circadian rhythm, which will affect your immune system and help your sleep, by having more bright light exposure earlier in the day, and by reducing bright light, particularly blue spectrum light, during the evening. Alcohol. Safe drinking. Really, there's actually no there's no level of safe intake for alcohol. Sorry to tell people. So if you're going to have a drink, you don't want to drink often and much, because there's no safe level. Alcohol depletes nutrients and antioxidants. There was one study where they gave them, just a small amount of vodka, and then measured the skin antioxidants sort of plummet afterwards. And the skin become more susceptible to sunburn. That's an inflammatory response, isn't it? Alcohol suppresses the immune system. How much do you have to suppress the immune system? Probably not very much at all to have a mild effect. But if you're a heavy drinker, you definitely make yourself more susceptible to infection. In addition to depleting all those sort of important nutrients and antioxidants. So, alcohol is really bad for mental health. Enough challenges in this era without that. During the COVID-19 pandemic's a really good time to consider a no alcohol challenge. Unfortunately, alcohol intake actually has taken off in Australia during this time.
And the essential businesses that stay open include liquor stores.
So there are a few on websites and things that can sort of help the person who doesn't need AA, but is finding it a bit challenging to have a no alcohol challenge, or to sort of moderate their drinking. Moderation, what's that? And one of them is the 1 year no beer website, and the UK, and the other one's the Australian website Hello Sunday Morning. So consider a no alcohol challenge for August or September, or right now. Mental health during lockdown, alcohol is definitely not the answer. It may seem to be in the short term, but it's actually associated with more depression and anxiety, which is why I never prescribe alcohol for mental health problems. I don't think anyone does. Stress, depression, social isolation, and they hit quality of life, they hit relationships, but also impact our physical health, and gives us a stress response, impacts on our immune health. Big risk factor for many supposedly physical diseases. And I guess all these things also make healthy behaviour, ironically, harder when we're feeling stressed and depressed and isolated. In addition to this, a lot of people are under a lot of stress with income and job security, loss of sort of meaning in their life. We might complain about going to work, but then if we haven't got work, we sort of feel at a loss. And down in Melbourne, we've taken it to a new level. We've got 5 million people, and we're now in this more severe lockdown. And many of us were already feeling over it before the severe lockdown came in. We know why it had to come in. And there's no clear end in sight. We're sort of not able, our ski season's off. There's no snow anyway. But we're not even sure where the next ski season will be on, like Christmas. Christmas might be cancelled. And I think even if you're not in Melbourne, if you're in Sydney or in Queensland, you're looking at Melbourne and thinking, oh no, we could be next. So some strategies for better mental health is stay connected with others, whether you're attending silly webinars or having family meetups, or meeting with a few family members and things on Zoom, or ringing up your mum. You know, try and use all those fantastic means we've got to sort of stay a bit connected with other people. This is probably particularly important for people who live alone. I mean, Jenny and I have got each other to argue with, but if you live alone, what, the dog? Pets are great too. And I think you need to remember that maintaining a daily routine can help, you know, having that regular sleep, having regular meal times. If you work from home, you know, make it sort of work and not work. And I think it's important to remember, because we noticed early in the COVID pandemic that many people fell off the wagon with their whole foods, plant-based nutrition under the stress. But you need to remember that it's even more important to eat healthy, because eating the healthier whole foods, plant-based food will make you feel a lot better than just the short-term burst of dopamine you might get from the chocolate bar or the vegan Magnum. And make daily exercise a habit rather than a decision. You know, if you make it a habit, then there's no sort of will I, won't I, it just becomes part of your day. Schedule it in somewhere. Take a break from the news and media. If the people on website, webinars and on the media and on the television and social media you're finding just too negative, well, turn it off for a while. Go and read a book or something. And I actually have this idea that, you know, we can use this time to sort of embrace change. Like there's going to be before BC and AC, like things are not going to be the same. You know, things that are done virtually, things that are done online, things are not going to be the same after COVID as they were before. Learn something new. Plan for the future. You know, look forward to a future. Like there will be a future. There will be light at the end of the tunnel. It's just a very long tunnel. And there are some resources out there. Like recently I noticed that the Beyond a Blue website has a whole set of coronavirus mental health services. And then, hey, suicide rates have increased. Many people are really in dire straits with this. If that's you or someone close to you, you know, there's all sorts of services that they can ring to sort of get themselves through the moment. Lifeline, for example.
Irene has suggested the term doom scrolling for this one.
Doom scrolling. I do this every morning. I admit, before I even go exercising, I you know, while I'm drinking my naughty cup of tea, I'm already looking at the news headlines. And every day I'm looking at the report, the COVID numbers for the day. All right, so I'm sort of summing up, you know, all foundations of health are important. For optimal immune system, we need to tick the boxes to consider all of the foundations of health that help us thrive anyway. And that's the nutrition, which we really regard as the keystone to it all. Physical activity, which we're really into as well. Sleep, which we mostly get. Stress management, maintaining our mental health, and positive social interactions. It's all important for an optimal immune system.
Okay, that's the end of Malcolm's presentation. I just wanted to mention that we have, if you're interested, if this is a little bit new for you, learning about whole food plant-based nutrition, that we've got a webinar series that starts next Sunday, and we've still got, I think, about 5 places remaining. And we run it over a 2-week period, Sunday afternoon, Wednesday evening, over the next 2 weeks. So if you're interested, I will be, we are recording this, and I will be sending out the link. I'll be uploading this, and you'll be able to view this again. And with that, I'll send out a link if you're interested in registering for our webinar series. We've been running them each month since May, and I think we've got a few people who are watching us tonight who have been to our webinars. So yeah, please join us if you're interested in learning more. We also, Malcolm's available for telehealth consultations or telehealth appointments. He can do these Australia-wide, and the only thing is, initially in the pandemic, Medicare rebates were available across Australia. Now it's restricted, so if you're in a lockdown area,
that's all of Victoria,
which is all of Victoria now, telehealth appointments with Malcolm have a Medicare rebate. As I say, he's accessible, but you have to pay if you're outside one of those zones. If you've seen him in person as well. So if you've seen him in person and are currently outside Victoria, you can.
in person in the last 12 months.
Yeah. So that's the deal with that. And I'm also available for nutrition consultations and or coaching if you're interested. We also have our immersions, which we've run 9 of these.
Look at all those
today.
crossed off ones. May cancelled, October cancelled.
Got one in February, just in time, which was, we had a great time. I know we've got a couple of people here tonight watching us who were at that. We've had to cancel obviously the May one, and we've just pulled the pin on the October one. Once Victoria's numbers started to look bad, we realised that was becoming impossible.
And we're optimistic and still taking registrations of interest, no money though, for December, but
there's still a question mark on it.
A big question
What
mark.
I was going to explain is that we do have usually about 50% of our participants come from other states, and recognising that we might not have open borders by before the end of the year, we might still be able to go ahead with the immersion if as long as we can travel, so long as we can have a group of 20 people in a room and feed them. If we've got, I think we take a maximum of 16. So if we've got enough interest from just Victoria, we will run it in December. Otherwise, we're soon going to decide our dates for 2021, and we'll list those up on the website probably over the next few weeks.
And yeah, I mean, obviously when we have a whole 6 days, our immersions are a lot more in-depth than our 4 webinar series. And we also have the cooking demonstrations from Anita. And it was reminded, Jenny, that we've got plans for a couple of other things. We've got plans for a short webinar series masterclass, where we sort of try and take it to another level. And we've also had discussions with Anita and planning for her to do a cooking demonstration series as well.
The planning is almost complete. We're going to start on Sunday the 23rd of August. We just haven't quite decided, are we running in a similar way to our webinar series with a midweek and a weekend, but it's going to be a 4-part cooking demonstration series, which I will help moderate the chat, but Anita's going to do the presentation in that. So when we've got all that sorted, we're hoping to put a newsletter together. I've been trying to write one every week for the last month, but everything keeps changing. Yes, but also just things keep changing. So hopefully later in the week we'll be able to get a newsletter out, which will have details about that as well. Okay, so we're up to plant-powered Melbourne. Well, about half our people are from Melbourne, but if you're on Facebook and you're in Melbourne region and you're not yet in the Plant-Powered Melbourne group, we're starting to run that as a much more active group during the COVID time, during the lockdown time, because we're acknowledging that everyone needs a lot more support in trying to maintain healthy habits and try and stay sane in a supportive community. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing our screen and then go to the questions that we haven't yet answered. Now, I know we answered a lot of the ones that have been asked of us. But I'm just going to skip back. There was something I skipped a bit earlier on that we didn't get to. Question about healthy arteries. Does plant-based eating help or reverse vein disease like mild varicose?
Yeah, I would have thought that once you've got varicose veins, you've got them because the valves in those veins in your legs have been damaged. So you're probably still going to have them. I guess for the whole foods plant-based diet, I would say it'd be a bit less likely that you're sort of going to have a sort of a inflamed, clotted varicose vein. maybe you'd have less progression. But I think if you've already got quite bad varicose veins, you've sort of gone past a bit of a tipping point there.
There was a question made when you were talking about the hydroxychloroquine that cats talked about it being effective to some extent in high-risk patients, but not healthy patients. I think isn't the problem with some of that research that, you know, that there's not controlled trials that have come up with anything conclusive. But yeah, haven't heard about that.
I mean, you know, I guess there are so many expensive, fancy antiviral, anti-inflammatory drugs out there that sooner or later they'll find that one of them has some effect. But what about also focusing on what we do know about how nutrition regulates inflammation, and for example?
So, and the questions that we've covered, I think, most of the questions that was put into us, but I know there's probably just a couple that we haven't.
I can see someone at the top of my screen who asked something about cheese. Yeah, no, cheese is really bad. Dairy foods are really bad. You know, if there's any group of foods that's bad for autoimmune disease, it's dairy foods. And cheese more so because, you know, cheese is sort of the fat and the animal protein part of the dairy, you know, with the fluid and the lactose sugar removed, although lactose is inflammatory, and then concentrated. So it's going to give you a really big concentrated burst of saturated fat and a lot of salt. You know, that's going to cause inflammation in the gut lining, and I guess that'll flow on to immune dysregulation. It's going to sort of damage artery function. So yeah, big thumbs down for cheese.
So there was also a question about the effectiveness of the diet versus the effect on health. E.g., if I'm 20% compliant, is there some benefit? 40, 60, 80%? How much will be to my detriment? Is it all or nothing? Yeah, what can you say about that? And Matt Malcolm's got a whole talk called
How Whole Foods Plant-Based Need to Be. You know, if we look at sort of health credits and debits, like, you know, I'm going to eat something that'll definitely be a health debit. It's like, how many credits have you got? You might actually have less than you think. You know, I myself look at, you know, my lifestyle, you know, earlier in life. Look at even things in my current lifestyle, like, you know, breathing in inflammation in a big city, getting stressed, not getting enough sleep. And I sort of conclude that, you know, maybe I don't have as many health credits saved up as it might seem, and that, you know, I seem perfectly healthy. But what's to say, even if I had a normal angiogram, that I haven't sort of got a inflamed area of plaque that's just not sticking out and visible, or some micro cancers, or you know, an autoimmune disease that hasn't quite passed the tipping point. So it's sort of like a difficult question that I would say that whatever step you take in the whole foods plant-based direction, you'll be healthier. But if you want the full benefits, particularly if you're already not in superb health, and who knows where many of us really are, you know, health, then you may actually need quite a high level of adherence to really get the full benefits. I guess, you know, on a community level, it's easier to work out, but on an individual level, you know, if it's like, you tell me as an individual that there's so many % chance of some bad disease, but if I actually get that disease, it's 100% for me. Caldwell Esselstyn's interesting, you know, like he says to patients, you know, if you're doing my diet 90%, then you're damaging your endothelium 10% of the time.
There was another question about, can nutrition help thyroid conditions? This person feels they're at high risk of contracting COVID.
Yeah. If you have to take,
I guess they mean,
if you've got autoimmune disease and you're not making enough thyroid hormone, yeah, you should replace that. The synthetic thyroid hormones you take to sort of bring all the body functions that up to normal, and unfortunately thyroid hormones really slow acting, long lasting, so it's not hard to sort of get the approximately right level on the body. What about the role of nutrition? We eat a few sea vegetables because we realise we need enough iodine, and maybe there's not much iodine in this part of the world, but then again we eat so well anyway. I think whole foods plant-based, keeping your gut microbiome healthy, keeping the inflammation low, the immune well regulated. We should reduce our chance of getting autoimmune diseases. There has been, I've listened to Laurie Marvis, Dr. Laurie Marvis, and she has seen a few people who've had long-standing underactive thyroid needing thyroid replacement hormone, including herself for many years, that when they went whole foods plant-based, there was actually an improvement, and they're actually able to go off their thyroid replacement and still have normal measurements of thyroid function. So it can happen.
I know you addressed supplements, but there were quite a few questions about them. One of them about what supplements do you suggest to take for an adult male, 60 years. I'll also just roll into that. There was something about DHA for children, and where do I get enough minerals like zinc, selenium, biotin, and B12 if I don't eat fish or dairy?
Yeah, I don't think they even know how much biotin we need because no one ever gets deficient in it. So we can forget about that one. Yeah, B12, yeah, we don't live in nature. We should take some B12, just a little bit, a small dose, maybe 3 times a week, or a tiny dose every day, or a moderately big dose weekly. We do need some. Vitamin D is important for immune function. The evidence coming out for that with COVID protection is pretty circumstantial. But, it is important for many functions, including immune. If you're not getting enough sunshine to make vitamin D, then I guess you need the second best substitute, vitamin D. Interestingly, sun exposure on the skin actually has other immune system enhancing effects. I don't mean getting sunburnt, but seems to enhance the immune system. So, sunshine would be best. But as I'm sitting here in the cold listening to the rain, I'm sort of thinking, I think I'll have a bit of vitamin D in my porridge in the morning. Zinc's the nutrient of the month, or actually magnesium was, but there's tons of that in plants. I guess you won't get zinc from oil. You get a lot less zinc from refined grains than whole grains. There's a fair amount of zinc in whole grains and legumes, many other whole plant foods. I think if most of your whole plant foods if most of your foods whole, and if you're eating adequate calories, if you're on a very calorie restricted diet for a long period of time, then it could be a bit difficult to get all your nutrients. Good reason to stay active and eat plenty. But generally, I don't think there's a national zinc soil crisis. I don't recommend zinc supplements. I don't even recommend zinc measurements because they're quite misleading and inaccurate. Omega-3s, I'm confident that if you eat, a low-fat whole foods plant-based diet and you chuck in, just to be sure, some, flax or chia, high omega-3 foods, even just a tablespoon a day, you shouldn't have any trouble with that. If you were to take, what about children? They shouldn't have any trouble either. Michael Greger recommends it during pregnancy breastfeeding. I'm not convinced, but if I had a vegan patient who wasn't on a healthy low-fat version of a whole foods plant-based diet, maybe I would be saying get some microalgal omega-3s, but otherwise I'd be inclined to say you shouldn't need it.
Another question, can whole foods plant-based reverse peripheral neuropathy?
Great question, because Neil Bernard's research into diabetes, his 72-week study that had much better outcomes on whole foods plant-based than, actually they didn't all do it very well, but the low-fat vegan group that sort of mostly did a lot better than the American Diabetes Association diet. And out of that was noted that that their peripheral neuropathy, that's painful nerve pain down in the legs, improved. I mean, I think he tells the story of one patient who came to him and said, look, it's gone, my peripheral neuropathy is gone. And I think Barnard said, do you mean it's not as bad? No, it's gone. And that actually led Neil Barnard's group to actually do a study of mostly diabetic people with peripheral neuropathy. And they found that it was effective for reducing or reversing peripheral neuropathy.
Another question, I currently have bursitis and bicep tendinosis. Would this level of inflammation increase my vulnerability to COVID-19?
Not necessarily. Sort of can be round the other way though. Some of these sort of tennis elbows and rotator cuff tendonitis and rotator cuff tears can be due to a sort of inflammation in the body, impacting and causing inflammation in the tendons and impaired blood supply to the tendons. But you can also get overuse injuries and tendonitis without having a particularly inflamed body. So like if you just had some isolated, biceps tendonitis, then I wouldn't take that as an indicator that that you're in an inflammatory state. If you have multiple different types of inflammatory conditions all over your body, that may be an indicator.
I guess the answer is to follow a Esselstyn-style whole food plant-based diet. Okay, there was one. I'm not sure if you've already answered this.
Yeah,
asthma relating to another chronic.
Yeah, we've already talked about asthma. I mean, some people just taking dairy away improves their asthma, but there's definitely some research linking the inflammatory or otherwise nature of the diet and the severity of the asthma.
What about MTHFR and supplements?
MTHFR, it's the gene that codes for the enzyme. I think I've got this right. That sort of remethylates, recharges the folate in our body, ready to sort of take part in the next chemical reaction. And some people have a sort of slow folate recharging enzyme. And the integrative medicine doctors would say, you need, I don't know, tetramethylfolate supplements or something like that. I take the approach that said, well, these mutations are very common. It could even be, perhaps 25% or 30% of the population have one or other variants in the MTHFR gene. And that sort of suggests to me that it can't be all that bad for survival, or it would have been selected out of the population. So I guess my position on that is, if you have the slow version of MTHFR, then you want to eat plenty of green leafy vegetables and other folate-rich foods. But if you have the faster, more common version of the enzyme, I think you still want to eat large amounts of leafy green vegetables and other folate-rich food. So it doesn't change my approach to nutrition, and I don't recommend a supplement.
Okay, have we answered them all? I'm wondering if we've missed any.
Would air frying with no oil cause inflammation like regular frying? No, when you heat up oil really hot and bubble things in it, it's sort of like there's a whole witch's brew cauldron of all sorts of chemical reactions and things. Heating up foods that are high in protein and fat to high temperatures and browning them, that generates a lot of bad chemicals. That could even be your sort of tofu and tempeh that was cooked at too high a temperature. Probably even my nice chippy air fried little potato tasty nuggets. You do generate some acrylamides and things like that when you sort of use high temperature cooking on food and brown it, but nothing like what you generate in a deep fryer, or when you brown a piece of chicken, or probably when you burn a piece of tofu. Ideally to be super healthy, I guess, maybe it'd be better if our food was sort of all steamed and nothing was crispy and brown.
I guess the thing is that the blacker, like the more you sort of burn it, the worse it would be. So
yeah, but there would be nothing like the level you'd get when you cook meat or cook meat surfaces at high temperature. Like even lightly browned chicken and fish has really bad stuff in it.
I'm going to answer this one. Any new suggestions to a response to the dreaded "where do you get your protein from" question? Well, one of them is to follow Doug Lyle's recommendation. He just says, I don't know. Just shrug your shoulders. Don't be too certain about it. But I mean, the longer answer is, there's protein in all of our plant foods, so long as you're not eating highly refined foods.
There's no protein in olive oil. There's no protein in sugar, but all the plant foods have moderate content, often higher than people realise. Like oats. The way we classify food as protein foods and carbohydrate foods sort of muddies the water. Like oats are oats and wheat have the similar protein content per calorie than any of the nuts. And I sometimes tell people I once calculated my morning bowl of porridge provides 21 grams of protein. It's only the start of my day.
And I've realised one other we didn't get to was about someone who had the flu shot and seems to keep getting colds.
I mean, some of that could be that he had the flu shot at the beginning of winter. One positive thing about all these masks and lockdowns is not many colds. Like the influenza incidence in Victoria has plummeted to almost nothing this year.
Okay, I think we're done.
Does your body need salt? Yes, your body needs salt. Yeah, it does. But you know, as a creature sort of evolved, like in African savanna and those sort of environments, we've evolved to be salt conserving machines. And even if you regularly work out and sweat out in the sun, your body adapts to really hold on to sodium really well. So no, you don't really need to add salt to your food, and you know, you only have to have a little bit of processed food in your diet, even a slice of bread, and your salt intake starts to climb. So I'd say to people, beware of salt intake, particularly knowing that salt actually affects the immune system and increases inflammation, you know, generally in the gut, even in joint inflammation. So be careful of the sodium intake. Be careful of sodium that might be, you know, soy sauce and other sources, miso soup. Yeah, keep the salt intake low.
Okay, I think we're done. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And yes, Peter, it's past your bedtime. So we shall finish up now.